Although fighting continues in the southern towns, much of the US Army still pushes north through the wind and the dust. Along the road, we met these Bradley and Abrams crews. They said they'd fought Iraqi soldiers last night who were poorly equipped, armed only with Kalashnikovs, and ferried to the front line in civilian four-wheel drives. They were easily picked off by the American armour. For the artillery unit we're travelling with, this is unusually close to the front.
When we first occupied here, just a few hours ago, there was mortar fire behind us. So I'm certain that we're in range of their artillery, no doubt about it. Also, just about 5 minutes before we occupied this position, our own infantry was only up the road just a few kilometers engaging the enemy. So I'm certain that when we first occupied here, we were very close.
Warfare, and some US troops are nearing Baghdad. Yet, not a single town or city of significance has yet fallen. More worryingly for American and British military planners, Saddam Hussein hasn't gone. Nonetheless, commanders on the ground say, yes, there's been more resistance than envisaged perhaps, but it's all going pretty well to plan.
The conventional forces have fought a battle using tanks and artillery, and what we're now seeing is elements of the regime security forces fighting a slightly more irregular battle, positioning themselves in the built-up areas and coming out to threaten us while simultaneously oppressing the population.
The city of Al-Nazariya, and the commander of our unit has allowed us to file this report, provided that we do not show any landscape, any sign of where exactly we are around the city of Al-Nazariya that could give signs that could give the Iraqi forces idea about where precisely the Marines that I'm embedded with are at this time. Ever since early this morning, this unit and several other units in this area have come under heavy mortar attack by Iraqi forces on the other side of the front line. The U.S. Marines have responded with their own fire, using their own mortar fires, as well as tank shells, as well as at times calling for air support. And we have seen Cobra helicopters hovering above us, using their powerful machine guns as well as some of the rockets to hit Iraqi positions further away from this location. Regarding the incident, the attack yesterday where several Marines were killed when they were ambushed by Iraqi forces inside the city of Al-Nazariya. We have latest casualty figures that are received by one of the top senior commanders here on the ground. Those casualty figures: 10 Marines killed, 12 wounded, and 16 still missing. I'm Alessio Vinci, CNN, reporting with the U.S. Marines in Al-Nazariya in Iraq.
The armies of Saddam are falling. All across Iraq, units that choose to face the might of the coalition have been scattered and destroyed. Soon, Saddam's brutal regime of terror and oppression will be at its end.
The over-optimistic American radio message is what Kurds want to hear, but what they now want to see are US soldiers. For weeks now, it's been an open secret that American special forces are in the area, but only today did they show themselves. This group is headed by a US Marine general. In a cautious military way, his brief statement hinted at a US-Kurdish alliance.
Fortunately, when I came into Iraq yesterday, I was able to spend some time with the senior Kurdish military commander in Dohuk. In the days ahead, I hope to have opportunities to speak with other important groups in northern Iraq to make sure that we don't misunderstand what the other groups are doing and to coordinate their efforts.
He also emphasized the US humanitarian role, aid for Kurds, of whom tens of thousands last week fled to the mountains. It was a clear warning to Turkey that sending its army in to help refugees is not necessary. American forces and equipment will arrive by air. We tried to drive up to a disused airfield near the city of Erbil, but we're not allowed to pass.
We're not allowed to go? Yeah. Why not? It's a United Nations airstrip. It's not used.
And this is another of 4 airstrips in the Kurdish region on which the Americans will land more men and light military equipment. The local opposition leadership say it's vital to do it soon.
The United States needs this front. Now the Southern Front has made a good push toward Baghdad. The Western Front has been activated by securing some airstrips in the Iraqi Western Desert. The Northern Front is also very important to be activated.
In recent days, new Kurdish Peshmerga army camps have started appearing across the rolling hills and plains immediately north of the front line with the Iraqi forces. We came across this one near a main road. The mobilization of local fighters is generally being taken here as a sign that the war's about to break out on the northern front. The understanding has been that the Peshmerga will come under US command.
They need to work more closely with the opposition and with those forces who have real estate, who have guns, who have forces, who have assets on the ground. This will happen, in my view, sooner, not later.
The first B-52 bomber attacks on the Iraqi front lines over the past 2 days are seen as a preliminary softening up process.
These Kurdish Peshmerga have not so far been considered as a surrogate army by the coalition, but with the greater than expected difficulties encountered by the advance further south, these forces may just keep the 100,000 or so Iraqi forces over the front line here, preoccupied and not available elsewhere. Gabirado, Channel 4 News, Northern Iraq.
From Gulf Company of the 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit board helicopters at Qasr and head north to bolster the coalition push towards Baghdad. Their job in the southern port now complete. In their place, British Royal Marines from 4-2 Commando, who have crossed over from the Al Khor Peninsula 4 days after they were airlifted into southern Iraq. Their task now to clear the town of Qasr of the pockets of Iraqi resistance that remain. The Americans who are moving out say the Brits won't face much opposition here.
We had individuals that gave up instantly. We also had individuals that gave up a fight. The fight was short-lived. Once they saw who they were encountering, they decided they didn't want to play anymore.
In the town, Royal Marines have already begun moving house to house in Qasr, purging the area of the small cells of hostility, making the town safe for humanitarian aid workers due before the end of the week. Most of the aid they will distribute will arrive by sea. Mine clearance has already started, and Saddam Hussein, it appears, has been up to his old tricks. These Coast Guard vessels with mine rails on the back went to sea with their deadly cargo hidden from view beneath canvas, but they're empty now. So where are the mines? Disposal teams found 2 vessels beached on a sandbank close to the port of Qasr, with 12 of these magnetic mines hidden on board. Between them, they contained more than a ton of high explosive. They were detonated out of harm's way. The mine sweeping will go on, and Navy divers and even trained dolphins will be used to ensure the waterway is safe. David Bowden in Qasr.
Around southern Iraq, firing out of those areas at British troops and ambushing them, firing on them where they can.
As we have been reporting over the last 4 or 5 days, Hilary, British forces do seem to be suffering the heaviest losses so far. And waking up to the news this morning that a further 2 soldiers are missing in southern Iraq. Have you any news on their safety and their whereabouts?
Well, what we know is that their colleagues in the British military are doing everything they can to try to find out where they are and what's happened to them. They were in vehicles which came under fire, the kind of attacks that I was describing just now. They were basically ambushed. We understand that their families have now been informed, but there are no more details for the moment about what's happening to them. We do know also, and I've just heard this in the last few minutes, that around 940 prisoners of war are being held by British troops in the south of Iraq. They're building a prisoner of war camp, and they're hoping that that will be established later today. And on top of that, important to point out that the troops are basically trying to consolidate their foothold in southern Iraq. Even though they haven't gone into the cities, they're trying to do things like set up roadblocks and screen vehicles that come past. All of this an attempt to try to get some kind of hold on this emerging guerrilla warfare.
And that certainly doesn't look like it's going to stop for some days yet. And what's becoming increasingly clear, Hilary, is that the information that we received prior to the war perhaps wasn't as accurate as it might needed to be, with the Allies very careful to stress that they are a liberating force, not a capturing force, but still that battle to win the hearts and minds of the Iraqi people, still very much one that needs to be fought.
I think that is what they are trying to focus on now, how to win the hearts and minds of Iraqis in the south who are theoretically opposed to Saddam Hussein. The British military will be hoping to encourage a situation where the people of southern Iraq rise up themselves and have sort of localized coups in the south. But that is not happening because Saddam Hussein appears to have put some of his elite loyalists in these southern towns, which means the people in the towns would be afraid to rise up at this point. That leaves the British military in a really difficult situation because they have responsibility for the south, and they had hoped that the south would turn benign. In other words, would overthrow Saddam early on in this war, and that the real problems would be in the north. Well, the problems will be in the north, but they are also very much in the south where the British troops are.
That we've got total control of the air. I mean, you would not have long roads of convoys if you feared air attack, but it does leave you stretched out, and you've got the possibility of hidden forces coming out and attacking you in the rear. We saw the Americans who were captured were maintenance personnel. They're not the combat ones at the front, they're the people coming up the back, and that's a problem. You've got to get these places secure so that you can then leap off from there towards Baghdad.
And this is Saddam Hussein's strategy in action, which is very interesting. I mean, the intelligence that came to us before the war was launched very much suggested that the south was going to be a walkover, and actually the more intense fighting was going to be centred much more around Baghdad. And it now seems that those southern cities and the port of Qasr has turned out to be something of a trap.
Well, he looks as though he's decided that he can't take the vast technological superiority of the Americans head on, and he's got to do it by a guerrilla war fighting side. I mean, the other bit that we're not seeing so much of is what's happening to the north of Baghdad, where there is a really quite confused picture.
Around the area of Mosul.
Yes, I mean, and you've got the Kurds apparently being encouraged by the Americans to act as their sort of proxy forces. You've got the Turks who are very worried about the independent Kurdistan problem, and also I think have got an eye on the oil in the north. You've got some irregular forces that may be Al-Qaeda related, and you've got the Iraqis wanting to attack the Kurds. All of that is a bit of an uncertain picture, and it's not as well controlled as it is in the south.
And another interesting aspect of the campaign coming in here, news that Australian special forces have been in action in the west of the country. Paul Adams, our correspondent in Doha at Command Centre, saying he doesn't get much out of the Americans and the British, but the Australians have been telling him that they have been engaged in some activity there.
Yes, the Australians always are more open about their special forces. They've also got a much smaller force component, 2,000 troops altogether involved in this conflict, and they need to take news back to their publics.
In southern Iraq, the Ministry of Defence says it's trying to find and recover 2 British soldiers reported missing after an attack on their vehicles in the south of the country. Officials are being vague about where exactly the troops have gone missing to protect them from Iraqi forces. US and British forces have been fighting to secure the city of Basra. Along the road to Baghdad, the coalition army has also met tough resistance. There have been a number of US casualties reported today. It's believed that elite Iraqi units have moved down to the south of Iraq and are providing stiff resistance against coalition forces. These pictures show oil fields in the south of Iraq. The US was planning to take journalists to the oil fields around Rumalia, but the military now say the area is unsafe. But the coalition insists the operation is still going according to plan. American military officials say they're investigating reports that a suspected chemical weapons factory has been found by coalition forces in Najaf, around 100 miles south of Baghdad. But Iraq has denied it has any chemical weapons. But at one stage... In the north of the country, a new front has been opened against the militant Islamic group Ansar al-Islam. Martin Popplewell, BBC.
The latest broadcast by Iraqi's state-controlled television, designed to show Saddam Hussein is alive and well and defiant, fully in touch with army commanders. Every appearance is studied to confirm it's not a look-alike. Every paragraph analysed for time references to determine whether it's pre-recorded. No one's disputing that today's broadcaster is Saddam, but his speech contains no up-to-date references to events after the start of conflict. But his polished appearance contrasts with this broadcast last week, tired, drawn and bespectacled, following reports of a raid targeted on his personal bunker, after which US intelligence encouraged speculation that Saddam Hussein might already be dead or seriously injured. Psychology is vital in the war. That's where the mass media comes in, and both sides are exploiting it. As Saddam Hussein's latest morale-boosting broadcast came to an end, a new wave of explosions hit the Iraqi capital. Coalition forces say missile strikes have been targeted on government and military installations, with the intention of leaving electricity and water supplies intact. Andrew Burrows, BBC News.
Helicopter in Iraq. This is from Iraqi television. That's what they are saying, that it is a downed Apache helicopter. We have no way of verifying that at the moment. You can see the aircraft in the background there. There's an interview going on at the moment. These are latest pictures that have just come in via Iraqi television. Just to repeat, they're claiming it is a downed Apache helicopter. We'll bring you more on that as soon as we get some information.
Anti-aircraft fire. Some of it's small arms fire, ranging right up to rocket-propelled grenades, which destroyed the engine of one of the helicopters. That did, though, manage to limp back to the airfield where they are now, Becky.
This, of course, begs the question, has there been, or have there been any reports of any downed aircraft from that regiment? And indeed, what's the regiment saying at this point?
At this point, there's nothing I can say on that under the ground rules of the military embed. It is the general rule that if any aircraft were to go down inside Iraqi territory, then as long as rescue operations were going on, the reporter would not be able to comment on those situations, Becky.
Okay, give us some sense then of the mood in the regiment, and indeed some sense of the sort of missions that the guys flying these helicopters have actually been carrying out.
This was the first major mission carried out by the 11th Helicopter Attack Regiment and also 1st Attack Battalion of the 1st Cavalry. Together those units form a Helicopter Attack Task Force. Typically those two units carry out what is called deep strike operations. So they're not flying ahead of tanks or ahead of infantry divisions, but typically will fly very deep behind enemy lines, depending on who the enemy is at this time. Obviously, in this case, deep behind Iraqi lines, and try and strike at their strategic positions. The helicopters carry a vast array of weaponry, in particular the Hellfire missiles, rockets, and 30mm cannons. But this was indeed the first main mission for this regiment, Becky.
People to say anything who is in breach of international law. Those criminals who are invading our country still have the nerve to cry like crocodiles over those mercenaries that they push to their death. We say to these hypocrites, we are committed to the Geneva Convention, and any mercenary who doesn't get killed on the battlefield will be taken a prisoner according to the Geneva Convention, and we abide by the convention. And the crocodile tears that they have been shedding in the last day, those criminals over the Geneva Convention, is laughable. This is only the first round. We will show more of their captives. And they're all being treated according to the Geneva Convention, women and men. Both male and female mercenaries will be treated according to the Geneva Convention.
Well, maybe it is convenient to brief you in English what I have mentioned in this issue. I told our colleagues in the Arab media that we noticed. I have to brief you the following. First, that hundreds of thousands of Iraqi militias, members and fighters, whether they are members of the Iraqi tribes, combatants of the Arab Socialist Party and their masses all over the country, now they are redeploying their numbers, which are hundreds of thousands, according to the stretch of the, what they call it, the boa, this kind of snake, the huge snake, the boa. They are deployed according to the movement of this boa in order to cut it in pieces. And they started already, and few farmers, few peasants, brave peasants, had shot down 2 Apache helicopters. We shown one of them on the Iraqi television only half an hour back.
And today came news of downed helicopters far to our north. Shortly after we arrived here this afternoon, the missile launchers of 2-4 artillery fired off 6 missiles. We've been told the first 4 were to give covering fire to special forces who were rescuing the downed Apache crew. We've been told the last 2 missiles were to destroy the helicopter itself and its secrets. These are the launchers which took part in the strike, here firing the first shots of this grand campaign. They say the Apache they destroyed was in the Baghdad suburbs. It's one of the earliest ground-based attacks on the city, and a sure sign that battles further south will do nothing to stop the assault on Saddam Hussein's capital. Carl Dinnan, Channel 4 News in central Iraq.
Umm Qasr, and it's now evident that in Basra there are groups of irregular forces operating in civilian clothes, and we believe they're Ba'ath Party zealots, would describe them very well, are linked to the SSO organization.
That means Saddam's party zealots, you're saying, and the Special Security Organization?
That's correct. They were in Umm Qasr, and we now think they're in Basra. Now, we're configured as a war-fighting force. We can take on the conventional Iraqi army very easily in the desert, and that's been shown both by the Americans and ourselves, and we triumph very, very easily. We're now seeing, perhaps equally, some of the Iraqi regular army have moved back into Basra. That's going to face us one problem. But when we take on these irregular forces, we're just going to have to think slightly more cleverly and slightly more adroitly as about how we take them on. We're pretty well versed in this, the British. We've done this many, many years over our pretty long military history. And it will just mean a slight rejigging, reposturing and methodology, which I won't go into in detail, just to adapt to that slightly different threat.
Well, we've been seeing some quite dramatic pictures shot by, in fact, British soldiers out there of them going into various buildings on the outskirts of Basra. There's also been some firing, I understand, of artillery out of Basra, and British have returned. Just describe that.
Well, last night, British forces who were 5 kilometers west of Basra were engaged by artillery coming out of Basra. We responded to that. We have to. We can't sit on the ground and take incoming artillery fire. We don't want to fire into Basra, but we have to if we're taken on.
Some British convoys are held up by the insecurity still stalking the south of Iraq. But the hope is that will all end as the Royal Marines move in and the Americans move on. Mark Austin, ITV News, outside Qasr
Paratroopers deep in Iraq. This is the farthest point into the country British forces have reached. I travelled with the paras as they arrived to set up a forward base at the northwest tip of the Rumeila oil fields. Smoke from the burning oil wells billowing on the horizon. American forces have pushed through this region in their drive north towards Baghdad. But in their wake, they have left pockets of instability between here and the border. The task of dealing with any Iraqi soldiers left in this area falls to these men. They dig into the dirt in this exposed desert plain, prepared for a fight.
Because of the way that we've been trained and due to the visibility we've been given across the whole area of operations, we're in a position to do whatever we're required.
The Chinooks lift off from the sand. After refuelling at an airfield now under British control near the port of Basra, we take in the second wave of paratroopers, backpacks weighing more than the men themselves. Flying over southern Iraq, we saw no fighting and few people, but the flaming oil wells, a burning reminder of Iraqi resistance. Andrea Catherwood, ITV News, southern Iraq.
Nasiriyah is turning out to be one of the fiercest battles of this war so far. For the third day, US Marines attacked Iraqi forces with artillery. Gunships were brought in to attack Iraqi positions. One of the key bridges across the Euphrates is in American hands. The focus of the fighting is around the second bridge at the northern end of town. Some Iraqi prisoners have been taken.
Most of them are either running or lying to us, trying to deceive us when we're just here to help them.
The battle for Nasiriyah has delayed some units heading towards Baghdad. But I watched today the road north clogged with American armor and support vehicles. And the commander of coalition forces said today the progress north had been rapid and dramatic. They had reached Karbala, a town 60 miles south of Baghdad. 2 Republican Guard divisions stand between these forces and the Iraqi capital. It is likely to be a decisive encounter. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News, north of Nasiriyah, Iraq.
Iraqi soldiers outside the southern city of Najaf. Coalition commanders insist despite localized setbacks, they are achieving their objectives in dramatic fashion. Here in the back of an armored patrol carrier, an American soldier gives his prisoner a drink of water, as the leading units of the American force are now reported to be just 50 miles from Baghdad. But if the main thrust of the invasion is racing ahead, there are pockets of resistance that were not anticipated. Around Iraq's second city of Basra, the British desert rats have been clearing mines and coming under fire from Iraqi regular soldiers and others in civilian dress. It was close to here that a British soldier was fatally wounded by rioting Iraqi civilians.
Day 5 of the invasion, and the American commander says his troops are closing in on Baghdad, the power base of Saddam Hussein. By tonight, they were just 60 miles south of the capital. Progress, said General Tommy Franks, has been rapid and in some cases dramatic. Behind them, the troops left oil wells ablaze, fired by Iraqis in retreat, a compelling sight, but just 7 out of a total of 500 wellheads. It could be a slightly longer haul than anticipated. It's clear from what is happening already in Basra, Nasiriyah and Qasr that the taking of Baghdad will not be a doddle.
Well, we were told by administration and diplomatic sources that the British Prime Minister is due to arrive in the United States Wednesday night. We are told there are meetings planned for Thursday, and those meetings all but certainly will be held up at the U.S. presidential retreat at Camp David, Maryland, about an hour away from Washington, D.C. U.S. officials say it is simply time for the 2 leaders to meet face-to-face to plot strategy. Of course, by Thursday, U.S. officials believe they will know much more about how long and how difficult this military campaign will be. We see coalition forces just today engaging those key Republican Guard units south of Baghdad. So by the time the Prime Minister gets here, U.S. officials say he and the President may have some critical decisions to make about forward progress of the ground and air operation inside of Iraq. They also hope to have made at least initial progress in getting humanitarian supplies ashore. That, of course, is a critical concern for both leaders, something raised by the Prime Minister Blair today in his remarks at the House of Commons. Daljit?
But as far as we can tell in terms of the war strategy, they will both be on the same page.
So far, no indications of any rifts at all in terms of the military strategy. You have had British troops operating, in some cases U.S. troops under British command, both leaders voicing their condolences and sadness at the casualties so far, but there are no indications, the best we can tell here at the White House, that there are any disagreements about the strategy at all.
There's also another diplomatic bust-up between Washington and Russia. This time Washington is accusing Moscow, and of course Moscow has denied it, of ongoing support to the Iraqi military. They talked about night vision goggles and also about jamming equipment. Where's the evidence? Where's the proof, John?
Well, U.S. officials say they have the proof. They won't share it publicly with us. They say they have been sharing it privately with Russian officials, from mid-level staff all the way up to Secretary of State Powell in recent weeks. Now they say Mr. Bush today decided to raise this directly with Russian President Vladimir Putin, especially because of the issue of that jamming technology. U.S. officials say that the Iraqis are trying to use sophisticated technology to jam the global positioning satellite technology that the United States now uses for its most sophisticated smart bombs and missiles, the aerial bombardment we have seen in recent days in Baghdad. The Russians have consistently denied this. We are told in the phone conversation today, President Bush offered some of the evidence about the global satellite issue, and he asked Mr. Putin to look again.